Chapter 3, Garston Infant School. Here David continues to share his childhood experiences, focusing on his early school days after his family moved to Garston, Watford. The chapter highlights his struggles with adjustment, instances of mischief, and the early challenges he faced in education. David recalls his first day at his new school after the family relocated to Garston. His mother arranged for him to walk home with a girl named Vivian, but he got lost when she led him to the wrong end of Coates Way. After wandering around, he was eventually helped by a kind stranger and returned safely home. David struggled academically, particularly with reading and comprehension. His classroom teacher, Miss Kitchener, was German, and the cultural and linguistic differences created additional challenges for David, who spoke with a Lancashire accent. Feeling out of place, David often acted out in school. One incident involved him discarding a pair of plimsolls, belonging to Vivian, in a dustbin, leading to a confrontation between his mother and the teacher. In another episode, he mischievously placed the class hamster in Vivian's desk overnight, causing chaos the next day. David describes how these early experiences of mischief and conflict shaped his perception of authority and discipline. Despite his struggles, his mother tried to encourage his development by enrolling him in piano lessons and exposing him to constructive activities. This chapter highlights David's struggles with authority and education at a young age and offers glimpses of the rebellious tendencies that would characterize his later years. It also showcases his mother's efforts to provide a positive influence, despite the challenges he faced. Now listen to David read Chapter 3, Garston Infant School.
Garston Infant School. I get lost. We moved from Oldham to Garston, Watford when I was 5 years old. This was in 1954, and my mum took me to my first day at school, which was Garston Infant School. I was in the second year of the infants. My mum had arranged for me to walk home with a girl called Vivian, who apparently lived in Coates Way, and that was where we lived. It was about 2 miles from home. Not that I knew my address, because I didn't. All I knew was that we had moved to a place called Garston, so I assumed we lived at Garston Road. When it came to walking home, I had to follow Vivian, but she took me by a way that I never knew before, a completely different way, and across a park to what was the other side of Coates Way. She left me there, and I had no idea where I was, as I didn't recognise anywhere at all. Feeling uneasy about this, I realised I was lost. So I made my way back towards the school across Garston Park and began to ask people where was Garston Road. There was no such place, but I insisted I lived in Garston Road. A man with a red Dormobile offered to take me back to school to find out where I lived, so off we went. The school teacher said I lived at Coates Way, where Vivian had taken me to, but I said I didn't live there, as I couldn't recognise the place. I insisted in my northern accent I lived at Garston Road, but the German teacher contradicted me and said I lived at Coates Way. The man took me back to Coates Way, but I could not recognise where I lived. He drove from one end to the other. It was quite a long way, with a council estate on one side and private houses on the other end. This was where I lived, 149 Coates Way. I saw my mum in the front garden, so I arrived home after being lost on my first day at school. So the moral of the story is to learn and remember your home address, even at a young age, and I'm sure this applies to older people too. David and the hamster. My classroom teacher was a German woman called Miss Kitchener. She spoke with a German accent, and I spoke with a broad Lancashire accent. We did not hit it off, and I was hopeless at reading the flashcards. It seemed as though I was singled out and proved to be a dunce, as I could not really read. Being small, I messed about to divert attention from my inability to do classwork. One day when I arrived at school, I found a pair of plimsolls, or pumps, on the desk. They call them plimsolls now, which I later found out belonged to Vivian, the girl that lost me when I went across the park. And I did not like these plimsolls being on my desk. Feeling rather indignant, I placed them in the rubbish bin. I think I might have asked the teacher, "Please, miss, whose are these pumps?" But I was ignored. She did not understand me, so in the bin they went. The next day, Vivian's mother came to school wanting to find out where the plimsolls had gone. The caretaker said he'd found them on the floor and placed them on this boy's desk. When I was questioned, I was in trouble, and Miss Kitzinger said my mum would have to buy a new pair of plimsolls as I had thrown them in the bin. I felt this unfair and felt really picked on. I know my mum came to the school and had an argument about the pumps. And the fact that the German teacher was trying to teach English to me, and I couldn't understand her, because I came from the north, she was very indignant. This was only a few years after the World War with Germany had ended. I realised I could not read at the age of 6 years old, and this definitely showed up itself in class when we had to read the flashcards. When it was my turn, I just could not tell what was written, and I felt embarrassed. It was humiliating. As a result, I felt the need to distract the attention from any action that involved me reading, and I caused a disturbance of some kind. I was known as a naughty boy, and to top it all, the kids mocked my northern accent. At that time, my mum had to work late, and it was arranged for me to wait in the classroom after school until my mum came to pick me up. This was shortly after the event with the plimsolls. The class had a pet hamster, and this was kept in a little cage at the front of the class, and it got all the attention from everyone. I was the one that got no attention, but rather got into trouble. One evening, whilst I was waiting in the classroom for my mum to come to collect me, the teacher left the classroom for a short while, leaving me alone in the classroom. I went towards the hamster's cage and thought to myself, why do you get all the attention? I know what I'm going to do. I took the hamster out of the cage, closed the door. I looked at the hamster in the eyes and went over to Vivian's desk and put it inside her desk, shutting the lid quickly, thinking that will pay her back for getting me into trouble with her plimsolls. I sat back in my chair before the teacher returned. I went home with my mum that night as though nothing had happened. The next day I went into class as quiet as I could and keeping out of the way. I waited patiently for the eruptions. Then suddenly, "Oh, miss," screamed Vivian, "the hamster's in my desk." It had nibbled everywhere, nibbled the books, done a wee, everywhere, all over the book, and made a lovely mess. Throughout the night, everyone gathered round the desk to see at that time. I felt very guilty. One boy tried to suggest the hamster had escaped and climbed up the table leg and through the hole that was drilled in the bottom of the desk for the spilt ink to drain. A good idea, I thought, so keep thinking that, I thought. Then someone asked how did it get out of the cage as the door was closed. I was feeling very, very guilty now and wondered if Miss Kitzinger was thinking had I done it and done the deed the night before. I kept quiet, and to this day they don't know how that hamster got there. During this time, my brother was attending Lee Farm Junior School, the school that I was to attend in the next few years. And that's the story of the naughty boy called David and the hamster.